This is the Triton, a sailboat turned submarine that's powered by solar panels. Last year, I traveled to Mississippi where the Triton is made to learn more about it for WSJ's Equipped series. In Equipped, WSJ explores the latest military innovations and tactics from around the world, breaking down a weapon's potential impact and the tech behind it. The drone, which the US Navy has been operating near Iran, can carry various payloads and can sail autonomously for months at a time. If you want to learn more about other weapons, click the link in the pinned comment to watch the latest episodes of Equipped early.
This might look like a toy boat, but it's part of a growing class of military-use drones. It's the Ocean Aero Triton, and it's billed as the only autonomous vessel that can both sail on the surface and dive to operate in submarine mode.
Are they designed to be stealthy?
They are.
The Triton is currently being used by the US Navy in the Middle East, where the US is focused on deterring Iran.
Now is the time to scale.
And with the new Pentagon initiative to buy thousands of unmanned systems in the coming months, will more Tritons soon be used to counter adversaries in the world's waters? The Triton has several features that Ocean Aero says makes it useful to the US military. Each one is loaded with at least 5 cameras, which help spot enemies or problems in the water. It's powered by 740 watts of solar panels, which enable it to sail autonomously for 3 months at a time. And its payload areas can carry different sensors and weapons, making it capable of various missions. But the thing that sets it apart from other drone boats, according to Ocean Aero's CEO Kevin Decker, is its dual modality, its ability to sail above and below the surface.
Do you think adversaries are scared of this technology?
I think they're definitely concerned about it. Anything that can watch you and you can't find it if it doesn't want to be found is a concern.
Out on a boat, we got a better sense of how the Triton looks and operates in the water. At 14 feet long and 2.5 feet wide, the Triton was designed to have a low radar and visual signature, making it hard for adversaries to detect. And its gray color helps the boat blend into its environment when it's on the water. To dive beneath the surface, the Triton lowers its wing, gradually fills up with water, and descends, eventually disappearing from view. And it doesn't need a human to prompt it. Ocean Aero says the Triton can do this autonomously when it recognizes ships or other threats.
Do you have to consider the possibility that an adversary could scoop a Triton out of the water?
Yes, absolutely. One of the highest benefits of being this dual modality vehicle, the only one that can dive and sail, is to get out of the way. And when you're trying to evade an adversary or get out of the way of surface energy, being able to dive is tantamount to success and survivability.
A Triton costs between $2 and $3 million depending on the payloads it's purchased with. And it can sail at speeds of up to 5 knots, on par with other sailboats, but slower than many of the vessels used by navies. While being captured is considered a worst-case scenario, the Triton, like many other commercially made drones, is considered by some to be a tritable, which essentially means it's cheap enough to lose.
A Triton is basically the cost of a Tomahawk missile. So it's not inexpensive, but what I would say there, it's the right sweet spot.
The Triton hasn't logged as many operational hours as some other drone boats, and the company is racing to catch up to some of its competitors in terms of developing more advanced capabilities.
What are you guys working on now?
I think the future, the next 12, 24, 36 months, is going to look like smarter Tritons. Where we want to get to is interconnectivity on a swarm basis, using all these Tritons together.
Will the Triton be weaponized?
I think it's dependent upon what the mission that the customer wants to go do. And that's for them to decide, right? It's for us to provide the platform that can deliver payloads. It's for them to decide what they want to put on that, inclusive of weapons or cameras or anything else that they want.
The Triton is being used by US task forces in the Middle East.
So this is the Triton.
We saw it in the Persian Gulf last year as the US Navy paired the Triton and other unmanned drone boats with artificial intelligence to expand its eyes and ears on the water. Navy operators and defense experts say the Triton and other autonomous vessels like it could be used for both offensive and defensive purposes, like protecting ports and naval bases or jamming and attacking them, finding and neutralizing sea mines or laying them, monitoring underwater pipelines and communications cables or disrupting them, and defending Navy ships and other assets or destroying them. Drones can also be used for intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance purposes, like identifying and flagging threats, and for communications purposes, like creating a 5G network at sea. In Ukraine, cheap drone boats have shown their value time and time again. attacking Russia's infrastructure and large ships to alter the balance of power in the Black Sea. While drones have been around for years, some military analysts have criticized the Pentagon for moving too slowly when it comes to adopting a range of unmanned and artificial intelligence technologies. Acknowledging a need to innovate with urgency, Deputy Defense Secretary Kathleen Hicks announced the Replicator Initiative this summer, a plan to buy thousands of air, sea, and land-based drones over the next 2 years.
We have an opportunity now for a game-changing shift that we have long pursued.
Ocean Aero, which counts investors like Lockheed Martin, is betting on growing interest in maritime drones, both from the U.S. and its partners abroad.
What other countries are interested in your technology?
We're in contact with Australia and the United Kingdom. We are in discussion with India. I was just in Taiwan 3 weeks ago where I met with members of their Coast Guard and Navy who clearly have a very large need given their geopolitical situation.
To keep up with demand, the company built a new factory in Mississippi.
3, 2, 1.
And there to mark its opening were the state's governor and both U.S. senators.
This is going to be a key part of keeping our nation safe.
Senator Roger Wicker, the ranking member on the Armed Services Committee, said drones must be deployed quickly to deter China.
The leader of the Communist Party of China has said he wants his country to be ready by 2027 to retake Taiwan.
Given Xi's timeline, would you say it is a race to get these systems out in the Taiwan Strait?
I absolutely would.
So how long from start to finish?
It takes about 3 weeks to build a fully complete Triton.
Ocean Aero says it plans to build more than 100 Tritons a year in this new space. And together with another location next door, it says it could crank out 600 a year if needed.
What kind of growth are you forecasting?
Now, I think the whole industry is poised for explosive growth. I think what aerial drones were 20 years ago is what ocean drones are today.
Given the new U.S. shift toward unmanned systems, Decker says he's optimistic about the future. But the Pentagon hasn't announced specific acquisition plans under Replicator. And Ocean Aero is just one of many commercial drone companies that will be competing for orders. For the first time in 4 decades, the U.S. Army unveiled a wholly new armored fighting vehicle, the M10 Booker.
It has a fully traversable turret. It is armed with a 105mm main gun.
Some Army officials have called it
A new light tank.
but many say the mission and protection of the Booker is very different from a tank. Here's how it compares to tanks like the Abrams, which the U.S. is sending to Ukraine, and why the Army has invested more than $1 billion to equip itself with this new vehicle. The Booker looks very similar to the Abrams. Both are fully tracked vehicles with a 4-person crew, 360-degree turret, large caliber main gun, and a commander's independent thermal viewer that allows visibility at night and in multiple directions. But the Booker is just over half the weight of the latest Abrams tank.
The battlefield role for the M10 will be to support deployed infantry forces. The Booker basically gives you armor support that you would not have otherwise had. It can carry a wider variety of munitions. It can go places that an up-armored Humvee can't go.
Tracked vehicles distribute weight more effectively for better off-road performance, and the Booker's road wheels are even lighter than previous tracked vehicles of a similar size. This allows it to move easily to and around the battlefield, a common choke point for heavier tanks like the Abrams.
There will be bridges, for example, that could support a Booker but not support an Abrams.
It also means the Booker can be deployed by aircraft relatively easily.
Rotate.
For the 31 M1A1 Abrams promised to Ukraine, delivery could be one of the biggest challenges. Only one Abrams can fit inside this C-17 Globemaster compared to 2 Bookers. But in order to get a vehicle in this weight class, the Army had to be more strategic about the level of armor. Just look at the turret on the Booker compared to the Abrams.
You can see from the roof on the turret in particular is actually armor.
The turret connects the gun to the main body of the vehicle.
The turret front is usually thought to be the part of the vehicle that is most likely to be hit by an enemy. Abrams' turret is very well protected. Booker's turret is probably fairly well protected, but the expectation is not there that it would be as survivable as Abrams.
Even with less protection, the Booker does bring new capabilities to infantry forces with its main gun, a nearly 105mm cannon. That's smaller than the Abrams 120mm main gun, but more powerful than the 25mm cannon on the M2 Bradley.
It gives you the flexibility of firing projectiles that are specifically designed to penetrate armor.
And the Booker also comes equipped with a highly accurate targeting system.
Essentially, on each of these vehicles, you have a computer. That computer can be used to detect the range to the target using a laser, and it can calculate where to fire the gun to hit a target, including if it's moving and including if you're moving.
But less armor might also explain a key difference between the two: engine placement.
In the case of the Booker, that would mean that the engine sits in front of the crew and potentially provides additional protection to them. So if the vehicle is hit from the front, then there is a chance that the crew would be more likely to survive a hit. Abrams simply just has a great deal of front armor. It balances it by having the engine at the back.
Compared to the Abrams gas turbine engine,
burning like 12 gallons of fuel an hour just to be turned on.
The Booker's 800 horsepower diesel engine is meant to extend the fuel time for a full 24 hours.
When the vehicle is idling, it will burn much less fuel.
All of these factors, weight, armor, main gun, and engine, play into how the two differ in deployment. The Booker is not necessarily designed to go toe-to-toe with an enemy's heavy armor.
Top-tier main battle tanks, adversary armored vehicles, are not what you would want a Booker for. This is why we have Abrams and the Armored Brigade Combat Team.
The Armored Brigade Combat Team is considered a heavy force. The Booker, on the other hand, is meant to work with the ground troops, or the Infantry Brigade Combat Team. Military experts say this team is designed for quick deployment and is able to operate in highly restrictive terrain like jungles, forests, mountains, and cities.
The advantage of infantry is that they can go lots of places. They have lots of ability to see things. They can sneak around more effectively. If you are fighting in an environment that has very difficult terrain, they can then communicate where the most dangerous targets are to your tank.
And the crew members operating this vehicle will find it rather familiar because both the Booker and the Abrams are made by the same company, General Dynamics Land Systems, so they do share some features in helpful ways.
We're told that they have similar controls for the crew members.
These shared characteristics will allow for more seamless training.
It will be very familiar to tankers who will basically use similar crew drill.
And both the Booker and the Abrams have compartmentalized ammunition, which is a design intended to protect the crew if the ammunition explodes. This is what helps these vehicles avoid the jack-in-the-box explosion seen with many Russian tanks during the war in Ukraine, where ammunition stored around the turret exploded, likely killing the crew and causing the turret to fly off. But the arrival of the Booker comes at a time when new challenges have arisen for tanks and combat vehicles alike.
Modern armored vehicles can be attacked from literally any direction. Right now in Ukraine, vehicles are worrying about artillery and drones that might attack the top of a vehicle. They have to deal with mines that would attack the bottom of a vehicle. And of course, direct fire threats can come from any direction.
The Army grew interested in building a vehicle like the Booker just years after Russia's annexation of Crimea, with experts noting the need for more mobile protected firepower in light of modern Russian warfare. But actually making the Booker a reality hasn't been cheap. Last summer, General Dynamics was contracted for the production and fielding of nearly 100 vehicles in a $1.14 billion deal, before extending the contract to include an additional 26 vehicles and adding another $258 million. But the vehicle has run into issues. Early tests found high levels of toxic fumes when firing the main gun.
The Army has pretty high expectations of how ready a vehicle should be when it reaches soldiers. If there's any issue with soldier safety, problem with the fumes from the main gun, which they actually have dealt with, according to the office that works the acquisition on this, they'll have to deal with that before they can greenlight production.
The first unit of M10 Bookers is expected toward the end of 2025. Each of those systems is expected to cost around $13 million, with plans for the cost to go down as production increases. This price doesn't perfectly compare to the estimated $10 million Abrams because, unlike the Abrams, the Booker is a new build.
The difference between the newest version of Abrams and the original version of Abrams is night and day. Abrams literally got a gun upgrade, a different main gun installed when it went from the M1 to the M1A1.
But this first iteration of the Booker fills an important gap in the Army's capabilities and is intended to serve as a long-term solution.
When this thing is fielded, there will almost certainly be then subsequent changes. You give a vehicle like this to a bunch of soldiers and they will find ways to break it that you need to fix, and they will find things to improve about it that will then go back up through the Army and ultimately, hopefully turn into a Booker A2 that is a better version.
The Air Force is planning on spending $130 billion to replace Cold War-era intercontinental ballistic missiles with a new modern iteration, the Sentinel missile. The replacement could boost U.S. nuclear defense strategy, but there have been doubts about the cost and logistics of the new systems, even from the head of the Air Force. If you like these types of videos, click the link in the pinned comment for more.
Ignition.
This intercontinental ballistic missile, or ICBM, is a major part of the U.S.'s nuclear defense strategy. But there's a problem. These Minuteman missiles were supposed to last 10 years, but that's turned into almost 60. The Air Force is spending over $100 billion to replace them with a new modern iteration, the Sentinel missiles. But there are concerns about the process of replacing them, even from the head of the Air Force.
Sentinel, I think, is quite honestly struggling a little bit.
Here's how ICBMs fit into the U.S.'s nuclear strategy, how they work, and why the challenges of replacing them are mounting. ICBMs make up the land leg of the U.S.'s nuclear defense strategy, called the nuclear triad. The other two legs are submarines in the sea and bombers in the air.
The submarines are going to have that greater stealthy quality. Bombers have the greatest flexibility in terms of taking different routes, flexibility in terms of recalling and not firing. The benefit of ICBMs is not their location necessarily, but the fact that they're distributed.
That is, they're distributed in silos across 5 states and about 40,000 square miles.
By having 450 silos spread out over a number of states in the American West, that creates a massive targeting problem for the other side. To kill 450 silos, you would have to devote 800 or 900 weapons, round numbers.
The Air Force says that a Minuteman missile can travel about 5,000 miles in under 30 minutes. To do that, the missiles are designed with 4 main parts. The first is this large rocket. The second and third are smaller, yet still powerful rockets. And the fourth is the nuclear warhead, covered with a protective shroud. The first large rocket allows the missile to pull away from Earth's gravity, and the warhead jettisons its shroud. The second and then third motors push it through the top of Earth's atmosphere. Then, the nuclear warhead can re-enter the atmosphere to reach its detonation site. But some of these Minuteman missiles, although continuously upgraded, are now over 50 years old and losing reliability.
The solid rocket motors that are in them tend to crack and have other problems when they've been sitting in a cold silo, say for decades on end.
The Sentinel ICBMs set to replace them work like the Minuteman missiles. But the new outer bodies will be made of carbon composites instead of heavier steel, potentially allowing for more nuclear warheads. Changes like these may allow for the Sentinels to be upgraded more easily during their estimated 50-year lifespan.
As opposed to opening up the silo door and going down and plugging things in from the side of the missile, the facilities are going to permit a much better and more efficient way of updating the system.
But these updated missiles and facilities aren't cheap. And updating the silos has been more complex than anticipated. That's a problem for the Air Force. The Sentinel program was once projected to cost $96 billion, but now the Air Force says it's on track to spend $130 billion. You can see why on this map of one of the 3 silo fields. These are the launch silos, and this is the copper communication wire connecting them. Much of this land is privately owned. The Air Force has to buy some areas in order to rebuild the silos with modern technology and replace the wiring.
It's probably the biggest thing in some ways that the Air Force has ever taken on, because it's a vast real estate development.
What the Air Force and the Pentagon broadly is finding is that perhaps they didn't take into account some of the enormous efforts that would be required.
Another weakness? The Sentinel's tech could potentially be easier to hack than a Minuteman missiles, according to one analyst.
As compared to an ICBM that was first deployed in 1971 and that until 5 years ago was still using some form of large floppy disk, The Sentinel is going to be a 21st century missile in every respect.
To hack a Minuteman missile, an enemy would have to dig up the copper communication wire and manually splice it to get it to launch.
There's actually a kind of a benefit to that. There's a beauty and simplicity to that because it's really hard to hack an analog system from the 1970s.
Since the Sentinels will have significantly more software than the Minuteman missiles, officials are taking precautions, like upping boundary security.
I would say there is an enormous amount of attention being paid to looking for potential vulnerabilities in our nuclear command and control. And in terms of the Sentinel, they're going to make sure that it is resilient against all that kind of thing.
But increasing security and vast real estate acquisitions have led to the project going 37% over budget, which means it has to be reviewed by the Department of Defense and Congress. It's called a Nunn-McCurdy breach.
DoD has hundreds of programs going on at any given time. Since 2007, Nunn-McCurdy has had a couple dozen of these breaches.
Since these breaches are significant, the review will be incredibly detailed as they decide whether the Sentinel project should continue. And some lawmakers are arguing it's too expensive.
The estimates are well over $150 billion. For what purpose? To make us safer? No. Won't make us safer at all.
The Air Force and the Office of the Secretary of Defense say that having all three legs of the triad is essential to American nuclear defense. The Pentagon review is due in summer 2024, but military experts say it's unlikely to be halted.
Every presidential administration since the end of the Cold War has taken a look and kind of scratched their heads and says, hey, do we really need three different legs of a triad? And as it turns out, every single administration, after looking at that, comes back and says, well, actually, yes.
In late November, this guided missile destroyer, the USS Carney, shot down a drone launched by Houthi-controlled territory in Yemen. Just 1 month earlier, the ship intercepted several drones and cruise missiles fired by the Houthis. The Carney and other destroyers were sent to the Middle East with carrier strike groups to deter the Houthis and other militant groups, like Hezbollah, from getting involved in the Israel-Hamas war. So how did the Carney spot and shoot down the drones and missiles? And how else could the destroyer and its numerous defensive systems come into play in this conflict? Destroyers like the USS Carney have a few purposes, but experts say the main one is to protect their carrier strike group, an aircraft carrier and several ships that travel together. To do this, they use an automated and fully integrated combat system called Aegis.
The DDG destroyers really are defined by the Aegis combat system. It's the brains that pulls all these elements together.
Aegis is a reference to Zeus's protective shield in ancient Greek mythology. It connects various weapon systems on board, from the radar to the missile launch systems, contributing to both offensive and defensive operations. To spot potential threats, the ship employs the Spy-1D radar, the eyes of the system. 4 antennas on various sides of the ship provide full 360-degree coverage of the destroyer's surroundings. And the radar can detect a target as small as a golf ball over 102 miles away, and automatically track more than 100 targets simultaneously.
Should it pick something up, it's going to deposit more energy on that and develop a track and figure out, hey, what is this? Classify it, is it hostile?
After the radar has detected and identified a threat, Aegis works with the other systems to intercept it. To do this, Aegis communicates with the Mk-41 vertical launch system, a multi-cell module built into the hull of the ship that can fire almost any kind of Navy missile. It has a rapid-fire capability that enables the destroyer to effectively handle numerous incoming missiles. In the case of the October Houthi attack, the vertical launch system deployed SM-2s to intercept 4 missiles.
Fundamentally, the SM-2s are an anti-air effector, and so think going after cruise missiles or going after enemy aircraft, but also as well a handful of other things.
SM-2s have a range of 90 nautical miles and can reach an altitude of 65,000 feet. The Spy-1 communicates with the missiles to guide them mid-flight, illuminating the target for the missile to home in on. These two systems combined are the first level of defense for destroyers like the USS Carney, but they're capable of handling many other scenarios.
The principle of layered defense is fundamental, I would say, to the Aegis philosophy and for other systems as well.
One of those other systems is the CWIS, the Close-In Weapon System.
All those missiles that we talked about are going to have a much greater reach, whereas this is there for getting what they or something else might have missed.
The CWIS is defense for both the carrier strike group and the ship itself.
It's your last-ditch effort to kill whatever might be threatening the ship.
There are two types that the USS Carney may carry, the Phalanx and the CRAM. They fire different ammunition, but they essentially work the same way. First, the search antenna provides information about a potential target, like its range, velocity, and altitude. Then it sends that information to the CWIS computer, which determines whether to engage. At that point, the mount moves to face the target and the track antenna kicks in, which views a smaller area but is extremely precise. The track antenna observes the target until the computer finds the maximal chance of a successful hit. Then the system either fires automatically or recommends firing to the operator. The Phalanx is equipped with a short-range 20mm gun that can fire between 3,000 to 4,500 cannon rounds per minute. Experts estimate that the CRAM's range is 6 miles, and instead of a Gatling gun, the CRAM has a launcher that fires up to 11 rolling airframe missiles that can reach supersonic speeds. Experts say since these systems are the ship's last line of defense, they're given very little time to react. The CWIS may only have a couple of seconds and one chance to protect the ship from being hit. That's why the system works best as one of several layers of defense.
It's always good to have different systems with different effects so that you can begin to thin the herd, but you're not putting all your eggs in any one basket.
Experts say the carrier strike group's deployment to the Red Sea exemplifies the U.S. strategy to prevent the conflict from expanding and to defend Israel without putting troops on the ground. A different U.S. destroyer shot down a drone fired from Yemen in recent weeks. The destroyers also possess a number of offensive capabilities, including a 5-inch 54 caliber gun mounted on the ship and the ability to deploy both anti-ship harpoons and Tomahawk cruise missiles.
If those sorts of offensive or strike missiles are used, then that means that we've entered a different stage of the conflict. We would presumably be on the other side of a shooting involvement as opposed to kind of an aiding and assisting and serving as a defensive partner.
Carrier strike groups and the destroyers in them play many roles, but projecting power is chief among them.
The U.S. is certainly sending a message. Sometimes you communicate those messages through actions with talking softly and sending a big ship, and that's part of the overall message of what's happening here.
This is a 155mm artillery shell, one of the key ammunitions used in Ukraine.
Military officials estimate that Ukraine needs 200,000 a month to actually fight this war, to keep on par with Russia, and US capacity at somewhere around 28,000, therefore there is a large deficit.
Then the war in Gaza broke out, with the Israeli army using the same type of artillery shell. And now Kyiv has said that deliveries of the vital ammunition have gone down since that conflict started. Here's how the 155mm round became one of the most sought-after artillery calibers in the world, and how the US and its allies are ramping up production. The 155mm artillery shell was adopted as a NATO standard caliber after the Second World War. Military experts with defense intelligence firm Janes say the shell became popular because it balances range, warhead size, and damage on the target. The 155mm round is mainly used in Western howitzer systems. Essentially, it looks like a very large bullet made up of a steel casing, fuse, and explosive fill. A standard round is about 2 feet long, weighs about 100 pounds, and it's 155mm or 6 inches in diameter.
155 is basically a measurement, and it measures the back of the shell, so other than that you can do pretty much what you want as long as it has that caliber and therefore fits into a barrel that can fire that.
The 155mm shell can be configured in many ways. They can be packed with highly explosive material, produce high fragmentation, or use precision-guided systems.
Within that you have something like this, which is an Excalibur shell, and that runs on GPS, but if you look at these fins here that come out, actually guide it in its flight.
Major producers have also been experimenting with the shell's range.
And this is something called a ramjet shell, and it works by using oxygen that comes in through the front and then oxidizes the fuel, and therefore it needs less fuel so it can go further.
Norwegian weapons manufacturer Nammo, which is developing the ramjet shell in partnership with Boeing, says the new ammunition will be able to travel up to 90 miles. That's 6 times further than what the standard shell can cover, which is about 15 miles. In Ukraine, the 155mm shell quickly became one of the most requested munitions after Allies started to send their artillery systems to Kyiv. Since 2022, Kyiv has received more than 300 Western howitzers, and the US has provided over 2 million rounds of ammunition.
Artillery is hugely important in the Ukraine war, and Russia brought to bear its very large artillery assets, and Ukraine obviously followed suit. The other thing, it's a very, very long and at the moment quite static front line, so artillery is good for that. And then people realize that most countries don't have vast stockpiles of missiles for a variety of reasons, one of which they're complex and more expensive to make.
Since the war in Ukraine broke out, the price for standard 155mm shells has gone up from about $2,100 to $8,400 apiece, according to NATO officials. This is still much cheaper than missiles which can cost millions of dollars, like the Storm Shadow missiles used in Ukraine. NATO estimates that Russia fires up to 30,000 artillery rounds per day, 5 times more than what Ukraine can respond with. Some military experts say Western arsenals were not ready for an artillery battle of that intensity.
Stockpiles weren't particularly high, and the West realized that it didn't really have the capacity to fill the gaps very quickly, so it became very, very problematic very soon.
The US, Europe and South Korea are the main manufacturers of the 155mm shell. Before Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the US Army, which owns ammunition production facilities in the States, produced about 14,000 shells a month. But since 2022, Washington has been pumping billions of dollars into retooled factories to produce more rockets, missiles, shells, and rocket motors. It has issued almost $25 billion in contracts to arm Ukraine and replenish US stocks. In a year and a half, the production of the 155mm shell doubled. By 2025, Washington plans to produce up to 80,000 shells a month, according to Army officials. On the other hand, the EU, where factories producing ammunition are privately owned, has struggled to provide Ukraine with more shells.
The US Army can say, we want more shells, and obviously that has to prioritize. European manufacturers have said, despite this huge demand, they're not getting actual orders saying, we want this amount of shells for this amount of time, and then they're not getting those orders looking into the future that would give them the confidence to expand capacity.
Israel's war on Hamas militants created new challenges to the global supply of ammunition. By December, the US sent roughly 57,000 rounds of the 155mm artillery shell to Israel. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin has said the US was able to support both Ukraine and Israel. Military experts also note that the Israeli operations in Gaza don't rely on artillery as heavily as Ukraine, suggesting that the effects of the war in Gaza on the global demand for the 155mm shell could be limited.
Israel uses a lot more munitions that Ukraine doesn't really have, so it just uses a lot more missiles, and it uses its air force more than Ukraine can.
In order to combat ammunition shortages, the Ukrainian Minister for Strategic Industries announced in December that Kyiv agreed with 2 American firms to jointly manufacture 155mm shells in Ukraine. However, production won't start for at least 2 years.
The problem is not just supplying Ukraine, but it's building up your own stockpiles as well, which obviously Western countries need to do. So they've all promised massive increases, but as the European Union has shown, that's more difficult to achieve than one would imagine.
This U.S. weapon will arrive in Ukraine soon, according to a U.S. defense official. It's the ground-launched small-diameter bomb, a 250-pound class weapon capable of reaching targets over 90 miles away. The GLSDB is so accurate that it can strike its target within 1 meter. But unlike other long-range missile systems, like the ATACMS, the ground-launched small-diameter bomb comes at a considerably lower price.
Think of GLSDB as kind of in the middle, the Goldilocks missile that gives, in this case, the Ukrainians greater reach and greater standoff, but with a much lower cost and greater numbers.
Here's why the ground-launched small-diameter bomb gets a lot of bang for its buck. The ground-launched small-diameter bomb is a new precision-guided weapon that attaches to an M26 rocket. The U.S. has had an air-launched version, but it had to test the ground-launched version before sending it to Ukraine.
This particular munition is a bit of an innovation. It takes something that the United States has thousands lying around, and that's a small diameter bomb, and essentially straps a rocket motor to the back of it, and then fires it out of some of our most standard rocket launchers that we have for the United States and for our allies.
The bomb has a range of about 94 miles and can be fired from multiple types of launchers, like the M270 MLRS and the HIMARS, which have already been supplied by the U.S. to Ukraine. And this flexibility means that those who use it can be deceptive with their enemy.
So the Russians wouldn't necessarily know if that HIMARS launcher has gimbalers, has GLSDBs, or if it had ATACMS. And frankly, you could have mixing and matching of those things. And we want to use that uncertainty to the benefit of the Ukrainians.
The bombs are unpowered but are equipped with wings, which allow them to glide to their targets.
The glide feature allows you to come in from a non-predictable angle. You can shoot off axis and then come in from the side or from behind. And so if you're the Russians and you have your air defenses pointed in one particular sector, one direction, you might not be looking in every direction all at once. So you take that ability to glide to a target, and then you attach that rocket engine to the back, and all of a sudden you've got range and you've got a little bit more speed. You don't have to fly that aircraft with a pilot that much closer to the target.
The GLSDB flies slower than the ATACMS and other ballistic missiles, which makes it more likely to be spotted by adversaries, but also allows it to be more precise.
So you're trading some speed to get greater range and to get greater accuracy and to get the different flexibility for how you approach the target.
The glide bomb has both the ability to maneuver and advanced guidance. This combination gives it the ability to hit more difficult to reach targets like inside caves.
It is a precision-guided munition, which means it can maneuver in the endgame to get exactly, or pretty close to exactly, where you want it to be. It can come in and kind of curve around and come in from behind. And so you can come from all kinds of different trajectories, as well as different attack angles. It just opens the possibility to get things that terrain or urban areas might otherwise be really hard to get at with something ballistic, such as artillery.
At 250 pounds, the GLSDB warhead is smaller than the 500-pound ATACMS warhead, but it can effectively reach most of the same targets.
So it's not as big as an ATACMS, but it's still pretty sizable. And in principle, the sort of targets that you could use here are as diverse as anything you would otherwise use a small diameter bomb for. It could be softer targets. It could be things sitting on an airfield. It could be penetrating into a hardened bunker.
The GLSDB also has a number of fusing options, which allow the operator to select how and when the bomb will detonate.
You can tell an SDB to explode at some particular designated height of altitude. You can tell it to explode instantly when it hits something. You can tell it to penetrate a little while and then to explode. Those are useful for different kinds of targets, and so you have all those different options as well.
While the exact price of GLSDBs is unknown, they cost far less than other long-range missile systems like the ATACMS.
Ukrainians are shooting 6,000, 7,000, 8,000 artillery rounds a day, so the unit cost of these things does matter. It also affects how much the United States or other folks can afford to purchase for the Ukrainians.
An abundance of affordable munitions allows for what's known as structured attacks.
Perhaps you might want to have multiple GLSDBs coming in all at the same time and from different directions. And that's really going to complicate and to hopefully overwhelm your target. Perhaps you might launch your slower weapons first. They start coming in from different angles, and then you time your faster moving ballistic GMLRS or ATACMS to come in, and everything kind of arrives at the same time. The prospect of having structured attacks that can really confuse and overwhelm a defender begins to get pretty interesting.
The GLSDB won't be Ukraine's most powerful or longest range weapon, but it will add significant flexibility for attack operations as well as capacity.
The wings really give you the flexibility to have that aerodynamic maneuverability from whichever direction, whichever axis you want to come in from. You may be able to launch them this way, and then they begin to glide and come back from behind, all different directions.
The GLSDB could be a powerful tool to slow down Moscow's continued assaults on Ukraine. And its lower cost and existing stockpile means Ukraine could get more of them, although it's unclear how many GLSDBs the US will deliver.
We're taking stuff that's lying around in inventory and putting it together in an innovative way. Excess, surplus bombs, and marrying them with rockets that we have lying around. Now, we'll probably need to produce more of the rockets, to be sure, but the good news is we have a lot of these SDBs.
And while the stockpile will eventually run out,
it's not about looking for the perfect solution here, it's looking for the good enough solution, it's looking for the solution that keeps the Ukrainians away from defeat and pushes the Russians back, and so it's really putting a particular munition within this much larger picture so that Ukraine can repel the invader.
This is Russia's TOS-1A. Nicknamed Scorching Sun, its rockets produce a fiery explosion that burns so hot it consumes all the atmospheric oxygen in its path.
Even if a person survives the initial blast, the incendiary effects, the secondary fragmentation, there is a chance that they would suffocate.
Human rights advocates are pushing for its use to be restricted. And after Russia deployed its stock of a few dozen against Ukraine at the start of the war, defense experts said Ukraine's best course of action is to find and eliminate the TOS-1As before Russia uses them. The TOS-1A is a thermobaric weapon, often referred to as a fuel-air explosive, or vacuum bomb.
Which means that they mix the fuel that is contained within the weapon with the ambient air, and that creates the blast effect that accompanies a thermobaric explosion.
They've been used in some form since the Second World War, like the German naval warfare rocket launcher and American Blue 82, which it used to clear forests in Vietnam and against terrorist strongholds in Afghanistan. They're designed to dislodge troops from trenches and other enclosed spaces. To do this, thermobaric weapons have two key components.
The first being a combustible flammable material, which is, upon initial detonation, spread over the target area.
This material seeps into crevices and holes and anything it can penetrate.
And then there's a secondary detonation which sets off the combustible material, which has then mixed with the ambient oxygen and will result in a blast.
As the fireball cools down, oxygen in the surrounding area rushes back to the detonation site, creating a vacuum effect called negative overpressure. Look at the difference between a thermobaric explosion and a typical high explosive charge.
So you can see that a high explosive, the initial blast will be quite high, and the pressure will then drop very quickly and dissipate. But the thermobaric explosion, the pressure, while initially not as high as a high explosive charge, will remain high and expose the target for a longer duration to the pressure. And after that, there's obviously also the overpressure that comes back when the oxygen is depleted.
Each stage can be deadly to anyone near the detonation. If someone survives the initial blast, the overpressure can still give them severe internal injuries.
The trachea, the eyes, the ears, and of course, after that, when the negative overpressure comes back, there could also be suffocation. It's very difficult to protect yourself from a thermobaric explosion because of how it enters everywhere where you might expect to protect yourself.
Russia has about 50 TOS-1As in its inventory, and it's producing more. The system can fire up to 24 unguided thermobaric warheads in as little as 6 seconds, covering up to 10 acres, about 7.5 football fields. And because of this, Russia has used the TOS-1A mostly as an area suppression weapon to gain ground and create gaps in Ukraine's defensive lines. Because it's difficult to evade thermobaric weapons, some military analysts have said Ukraine's best course of action is to try and destroy the weapons before getting destroyed by them. So far, it's estimated that Ukraine has destroyed 14, damaged 2, and captured 3.
It is quite easy for them to target these systems once they are deployed and once they start firing off their rockets. The TOWS 1A is, to a large extent, quite a vulnerable vehicle. They are not made to be used over a long distance. That means that the system has to get very close to the front line.
To take them out, Ukraine has often flown drones directly into the vehicle, as shown in this clip from the state-run United 24. But in doing so, it's also putting itself at risk.
The subsequent explosion, where the rockets are still within the tubes, would be so massive that it could damage a lot of the civilian infrastructure around it.
Meaning the safest place for Ukraine to destroy the TOS 1A is out in the open, like it did in early January.
The biggest misconception is that the weapons are banned.
Vacuum bombs, which are banned under the Geneva Convention.
There are reports of illegal cluster bombs and vacuum bombs being used by the Russians.
There are 2 critical points in the law of war: how a weapon is designed and how it's used. The TOS 1A disperses an aerosol cloud of gas and creates an incredibly hot fireball, but it is not a chemical or incendiary weapon, which are limited by law. Because its intended use is as an area suppression weapon, and its primary effect is a blast, its design is legal. So to use the TOS 1A lawfully, Russia cannot cause excessive damage that outweighs the military objective. But due to the TOS 1A's ability to penetrate structures, Russia has repeatedly fired it in cities. Some experts like Van Kohler argue that its large area of impact makes it too indiscriminate to be used in urban areas. But it's unclear if and how any civilians have been impacted by these weapons in Ukraine.
There has been many calls for Russia to be held accountable for the use of thermobaric weapons in urban areas. However, that has not taken place as of yet.
The psychological impact and destructive force of thermobaric weapons has made them popular with numerous militaries. As for Russia and the future of its TOS 1A,
one has to look at the difference between military necessity and humanity. Of course, humanitarian law attempts to infuse armed conflict with humanity, but at the end, the overall objectives of states will always be met in the pursuit of military necessity.
The Valkyrie XQ-58A, a combat drone with AI capabilities, could be a key player in the US military's multi-billion-dollar effort to enhance its assets against adversaries like China. We look at how the Valkyrie is built for stealth and how it could fit into the US military's plans to establish a fleet of AI systems. If you like these kinds of videos, click the link in the pinned comment to watch the latest episodes of Equipped.
Launch, launch, launch.
This is the new Valkyrie drone. It's a prototype of a system that is said to take out targets over a distance of up to 3,000 miles and run on artificial intelligence. The Valkyrie XQ-58A could be an important part of the US military's multi-billion-dollar effort to expand its arsenal with thousands of drones in the next several years, all so it can keep up with increasingly advanced adversaries like China.
The Department of Defense has been quite clear that there's a concern about the conventional military balance really shifting in the Indo-Pacific in favor of China, which has more missiles and more people than the United States. And so to offset that eroding conventional balance, there's a view that we need to buy more next-generation drones to bring mass to the theater and reset the regional balance.
Here's how the Valkyrie is built for stealth and how it could fit into the US military's plans to establish a fleet of artificial intelligence systems.
It's really the only system flying, particularly that's been flying as long as it has, with mission configuration systems, with autonomy, with artificial intelligence, that's in the true attritable class range, which means sub $10 million, fully integrated, mission capable.
The Valkyrie, made by defense company Kratos, is designed for stealth missions using parts that are easily sourced. It is still in the development process and will have to compete with other AI-equipped drones for additional military funding. But within its class of drones around the $5 to $10 million price point, military experts say it's a notable contender.
We focus on a reduced number of parts. Obviously, the fewer parts you have, typically the less expensive something is. Some of the avionics are common with general aviation aircraft. Some of the avionics are custom and designed by us and by some of our suppliers specifically for the Valkyrie. It's the mix of all those that allows you to have a system with the capability level that this has, but without the sticker price of what typically would be a manned fighter aircraft.
The Valkyrie weighs 2,500 pounds, about as much as 2 or 3 concert grand pianos. 30 feet long with a wingspan of 27 feet, it's made to evade radar detection through its curved shape and more specific features like the serpentine inlet that feeds its turbofan engine. The Valkyrie can accelerate to Mach 0.85, travel 3,000 miles at up to 45,000 feet in altitude, and carry 600 pounds of weapons internally and the same amount on each wing. And it doesn't require a runway to launch. It can fly from aircraft carriers or small airfields. But one of the most important parts of the Valkyrie is what's controlling it.
It's a combination of the AI with the features of the aircraft itself that really make it unique. So think about the Vanguard programs that the Air Force has rolled out to say this represents the future, like adding uncrewed systems, performing manned-unmanned teaming, performing multiple teams of uncrewed aircraft together, and all of those proof of concept elements have been demonstrated with the Valkyrie as it's evolved. And in addition to proving those basic concepts, the Valkyrie evolved as a system so that it can be a primary platform and system that will ultimately be used to perform those actual missions.
The U.S. military has recently doubled down on artificial intelligence to counter threats from China and keep up with its rapidly expanding arsenal.
We must move with urgency and unity of purpose to ensure we can maintain the peace and have our troops ready for whatever may come, because that's what's required in this era of strategic competition with the PRC.
While some military technology already incorporates artificial intelligence, like computers that pull data from satellite images or video, the military is exploring tech with much broader capabilities, from inexpensive drones with various intelligence-gathering sensors to automated missile defense systems. The military intends to use these in such large numbers that enemies can't destroy them all. At this point, multiple branches of the military and defense contractors are working on AI pilot systems, and they're testing some with the Valkyrie. The Air Force Research Lab conducted its first test mission with an AI-equipped Valkyrie over the summer, and Shield AI, a contractor for the Defense Department, is working on its own AI pilot with the drone. The Valkyrie is designed to run a variety of missions in contested airspace. Its AI pilot would use a range of sensors to monitor and interpret its surroundings. The AI would share that information and act on it, issuing commands to the plane's onboard computer system, which would determine the flight path and settings to get where it needs to go. If the Valkyrie locates a target, it would get human authorization before neutralizing it using bombs or other weapons. In a military operation, the Valkyrie could execute missions autonomously or be used in conjunction with fighter jets. Because the Valkyrie can carry up to 1,800 pounds of payload, it could also be used to launch a variety of weapons. But many military experts have voiced concerns about putting weapons in the wings of drones running on artificial intelligence, that drones could inadvertently deploy weapons that could cause harm or escalate conflict.
There are huge ethical and potentially legal considerations associated with putting true artificial intelligence in a drone. In the United Nations, there's discussions about banning lethal autonomous weapons, of course. But the problem with all of this is that our adversaries are unlikely to participate in any kind of ban on lethal autonomous weapons. And the United States, in fact, is not participating in any kind of ban. So the real issue is that even though we choose to act in a way that conforms with our values and our role in the international system, other countries may not choose to do that.
The Valkyrie is priced at $5 to $10 million. That's a fraction of the price of a crewed aircraft. An F-35 fighter jet can cost about $90 million, though in practice, many cost significantly more. But as the U.S. military looks to add thousands of AI drones within the next 2 years to its fleet, it will also be exploring systems that are substantially cheaper. Even if they don't travel as far or as fast or carry as many weapons, they could use the same AI piloting software being developed on the XQ-58A.
Other drones could accept some of the same autonomy. The basic AI and the ability to deploy AI across a number of systems is very important. And if you look at some of the things that the Air Force has published lately, They've been very open. Their intent is to have a family of systems across the DoD and to maximize commonality from an AI perspective, from an interface perspective with those different uncrewed aircraft systems, so that it doesn't require one specific trained operator for any one aircraft type. The difference, again, becomes in the mission capability.
There's still development work to go. In a test mission this summer, the Air Force Research Lab says an AI-equipped Valkyrie solved a tactical challenge problem in the air, but didn't provide more specifics. But whether the Valkyrie will move forward through proposed initiatives like the Air Force's planned Collaborative Combat Aircraft program remains to be seen. Other companies are also working on their own drones, like Boeing's MQ-28A Ghostbat. According to Kratos, the Valkyrie is already at a stage where it could be used, but full deployment is probably at least a year away.
Because the Department of Defense hasn't really settled on exactly the types of drones it wants to buy yet, and in fact probably needs a family of drones, what you've seen is that industry has responded to this demand signal with this wonderfully diverse set of capabilities that really do span the whole spectrum, from the very small to the much larger. Some of them are focused on intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance. Some of them can carry air-to-air missiles. A real question, and the thing that industry is waiting for, is where is that demand signal now to scale production of these drones? This is an urgent question because we want to shore up our force structure in short order to build up that combat credible force.
Given how big a shift economical AI-equipped weapons represent for the U.S. military, it's unclear exactly how or when the Valkyrie or the software being built on it will actually reach the battlefield. Commonly referred to as a flying tank and the world's only assault helicopter, the Mi-24 has the ability to carry troops and provide firepower simultaneously. The Soviet-era helicopter is playing a vital role in Ukraine's efforts to hold the Russians back. But Ukraine's fleet is small compared to Russia's, with less sophisticated targeting and defensive systems.
Ukrainians are using helicopters in the full spectrum of their functions, but they're very constrained by both numbers and the air defense environment.
Here's why the Mi-24 continues to show up in combat, and how Ukraine, despite challenges, is utilizing it to counter Russian adversaries. The Mi-24's popularity can be understood by three key features: armor, speed, and firepower, the last of which is stored here.
Probably the most prominent feature on the Mi-24, and that's the stub wings on both sides here.
These wings are what carry the helicopter's weapons and firepower, which can range from anti-tank missiles to unguided rockets and bombs.
If it were going after vehicles and tanks, it would have anti-tank missiles. If we're going after infantry, it would have more of the unguided rockets.
Toward the front of the aircraft sits an additional piece of firepower, either a 12 or 23 millimeter cannon called a chin gun. This gun is attached to a turret which can slide in multiple directions to engage targets from a variety of angles. The Mi-24s in Ukraine can carry even larger cannons, mounted on the right front side, shown here.
The Mi-24 was designed initially to take on adversary armor. So the Ukrainians are certainly using it to attack Russian armor, but I wouldn't be surprised if they're also using it against Russian infantry.
And while the helicopter can fire artillery, it's also outfitted with protection from the other side. The pilots are protected here by plexiglass and laminated glass.
And the crew are protected by what's called an armored bathtub. And what it means is that there's armor around the pilot, and co-pilot in this case, that looks a little like a bathtub. In other words, it surrounds them from the bottom and along the sides, not along the top.
While no helicopter is invulnerable to fire, this armor can help it and its pilots survive hits other helicopters can't.
And the reason they're protected on the sides and the bottom is that that's where they might be hit by ground fire. It's difficult to protect them on the top, and in any case, it's unlikely that they would be attacked from above.
The armor is made of titanium, which is strong but also light compared to other armor, contributing to speed.
Speed's important for an attack helicopter because it goes places and puts itself in situations where it will be vulnerable. Transport helicopters are designed to hide, so they will stay low and stay behind terrain to shield them. But attack helicopters have to expose themselves to an adversary in order to get a shot in, and during that period of exposure, they are vulnerable. Speed helps there.
Despite its age, the Mi-24 can fly at around 200 miles per hour.
It can still keep up with modern helicopters, at least in terms of speed.
It gets this ability from two powerful engines and the design of its rotor blades. But the Mi-24's shortcomings have become more evident as the war continues. Early in the Russia-Ukraine war, Ukrainian helicopter pilots said hitting targets was easier because the Russians weren't prepared for Ukrainian air assaults. But now, that isn't so easy.
There's a lot more Russian air defense along the front line. That means that it's much more difficult for Ukrainian helicopters to operate. They have to stand back, they have to look for weak spots.
This reveals one of the drawbacks of the Mi-24, its lack of sophisticated radar systems.
The reason that the Mi-24 is now considered obsolescent is that many of its systems are not as sophisticated as what you see on more modern aircraft. The Mi-24 doesn't have a search and targeting radar the way that many modern attack helicopters do, for example, the US Apache and some of the newer Russian attack helicopters.
The Mi-24 is also primarily a daytime helicopter due to its avionics.
Newer helicopters have much better nighttime optics. They might have much better views during the day. They have better defensive systems so that they can protect themselves more effectively.
But Ukraine is looking for ways to make the equipment that it has meet its needs. This round device on a helicopter in Ukraine shows what experts say is a countermeasure against infrared missiles, one of the most common threats to helicopters. And in the last year, reports say Ukrainian airmen loaded American Hydra 70mm unguided rockets into Mi-24s. Unguided rockets, while cheaper, tend to require pilots to be extremely accurate. If a pilot is firing an unguided rocket 6,000 meters out, even 1 degree off can result in meters off from the target. But
Hydra 70 rockets with a special kit that goes on the front for guidance can be turned into a precision missile. And what's important is that it gives it a volume of fire that it didn't have before. With the anti-tank weapons that the Mi-24 had, it could take out one target here, one target there, but it couldn't take out large numbers. And the Hydra 70 can do that.
In the short term, these rockets can modernize Ukraine's Soviet-era equipment. But in the long term, Ukraine faces bigger questions about its aging fleet. While Russia has been updating its equipment over the years, including its Mi-24s, Ukraine hasn't been able to do the same.
Their problem has been that these aircraft were built in Russia. When Ukraine and Russia broke relations for defense purposes, the Ukrainians really didn't have a very good way of upgrading their aircraft. The United States has been very aggressive in shopping the world's armament markets to find parts, to find munitions for Ukrainian equipment, and has had some success there. But long term, the Ukrainians want to move towards NATO standard, which will be much more easier to obtain munitions and parts for.
This dark and grainy footage shows Russia testing its new nuclear torpedo, Poseidon. The massive torpedo has been in the works for at least a decade. Once complete, experts say Poseidon can help Russia target coastal cities and military bases in the US and other NATO countries.
The goal is very clearly to show that they are still a first-class nuclear power.
But since Vladimir Putin announced the weapon, it's been shrouded in mystery and misinformation.
Nuclear weapons technology, for the most part, it's not new technology.
Traditionally, nukes are delivered by gravity bombs or ballistic missiles. But in 2018, Putin unveiled plans for nuclear weapons that would be delivered on modern systems. Among them was Poseidon. As shown in this clip from Russia's Ministry of Defense, Poseidon will be equipped on submarines, similar to some ballistic missiles in Russia's current nuclear arsenal. But what happens after it's launched is debated, and the answer relies on knowing what Poseidon actually is.
Poseidon has been called many things.
Russia calls it an unmanned underwater vehicle, or drone. It portrays Poseidon as able to guide itself around obstacles and enemy countermeasures, reaching great depths and high speeds. In the Pentagon's 2018 nuclear posture, the weapon is referred to, instead, as an autonomous torpedo, able to operate independently after launch. But a nuclear researcher says it's more likely that Poseidon will have some type of advanced homing and guidance systems, which would allow it to avoid some countermeasures, but would not allow for complex maneuverability.
Putin has said Poseidon will be dual capable, meaning it can carry a conventional warhead or a nuclear one.
One of the many things that we don't know about Poseidon is the yield of the warhead that it is carrying.
The largest nuke in the US's arsenal is the B-83 at 1.2 megatons. Although initial Russian media reports indicated Poseidon's nuclear warhead could be up to 100 megatons, more recently, Russian media has reported that the warhead would instead be 2 megatons.
There's no real obvious strategic reason why you would need a 100 megaton warhead.
Even then, the explosive yield of a 2 megaton warhead is about 95 times larger than the bomb the US dropped over Nagasaki, and 133 times larger than the one dropped over Hiroshima.
This is orders of magnitude larger in terms of the scale, the destruction, the devastation that this weapon could create.
But because Poseidon is meant to detonate underwater, its exact impact is unknown.
Some in Russia have suggested that this could create a tsunami with 10,000-foot waves or something along those lines. There's competing reports that that's not how tsunamis work and that it wouldn't actually have that effect. But that discussion about the tsunami effect, it really does just feed into that Russian narrative about these weapons being highly performing and about them having these catastrophic effects, because that is intended to deter over the long term.
Russia says Poseidon is designed to circumvent all missile defense systems, like the US's.
There is no defense system in the world today that can cope with subsurface vehicles.
But experts say the US missile defense system wasn't designed to stop an attack from Russia's existing arsenal.
So when Russia claims that it's developing these systems because of Western missile defense, it is either being far more optimistic about the missile defense capabilities that the US can develop, or it's being disingenuous.
A congressional report said Russia views Poseidon as a second strike weapon, but its potential capabilities led some analysts to believe it could function as a first strike weapon.
Russia has very specifically said that it is prepared to use nuclear weapons first if NATO countries attack Russia directly. And so this would potentially give an option to the Russian leadership for how to do that.
Though Russia began building Poseidon before it invaded Ukraine, defense analysts say it has used the weapon system to project power at a time when its conventional forces are weakened, a strategy imposed upon Moscow by its history. When the Soviet Union collapsed, its conventional forces were greatly weakened.
And it was around this time that Russia changed their nuclear doctrine. They felt they had to increase reliance on nuclear weapons and to actually consider scenarios in which they would have to use nuclear weapons first to compensate for that conventional inferiority. That still does apply today. What Putin is perhaps most afraid of militarily is NATO's conventional superiority.
The Federation of American Scientists says Russia is constructing storage facilities for warheads and the submarines that will carry Poseidon torpedoes. And in a recent speech, Putin said tests of Poseidon are being completed, though it's unclear what stage in testing the weapon has reached. So the question remains, will it work?
It's fair to say that what the Russians pronounce about their weapons capabilities and what they actually can do rarely intersect. They want everybody to be thinking about the possibility of nuclear war, thinking about a ruinous arms race, and so they are exaggerating what their capabilities are.
Russia has faced setbacks with some of its new weapon systems in recent years. And in 2022, Russia abandoned a planned test of Poseidon without saying why.
There are several challenges that Russia continues to face. Resources is one of them. The second is that their technology does not equal what is available to the West. The sanctions that were imposed on Russia because of the Ukraine war have constrained their ability to acquire some of these components.
Though Poseidon's future is uncertain, experts say one thing is for sure.
With the end of the Cold War, nuclear weapons really left the public consciousness. Putin has brought nuclear weapons back. Poseidon is just one example of that, but it's really important to differentiate between the reality and the facade that Putin is trying to portray.
The United States is sending $320 million worth of these weapon attachments to Israel. They're SPICE guidance kits, which attach to general-purpose bombs, commonly known as dumb bombs, turning them into precise guided munitions. Weapons manufacturer Rafael USA will transfer the equipment to its Israeli parent company, Rafael Advanced Defense Systems, for use by the Israeli Defense Ministry. The transfer comes amid continued concerns of civilian casualties in Gaza, where Israel has been targeting Hamas. The goal of guidance kits like SPICE and JDAMs, which the U.S. has previously sent, is to enhance accuracy while minimizing non-combatant casualties. But some experts say the large munitions, while more precise than dumb bombs, could still pose a serious risk to civilians. So will these modified smart bombs help reduce collateral damage in Israel's war in Gaza? SPICE stands for Smart, Precision, Impact, Cost-Effective, and the kits are made up of two main components.
At the front end, you have the guidance component and a target acquisition camera.
And then you've got a bunch of these control surfaces, basically fins, that extend the range.
The electro-optical seeker, or camera, uses a scene-matching algorithm to recognize and guide the weapon to a target based on a preloaded image.
The image that the camera is seeing is compared to the image that it's looking for, and as it comes onto the target, it's doing that comparison, and if it doesn't see it, it corrects itself until it brings the image of the desired target into view.
The control unit utilizes the fins to steer the bomb toward the target until it's in view of the EOIR seeker. Hundreds of images can be loaded pre-flight into a SPICE guidance package. The images can be accessed and a particular target can be selected by the operator in flight. And it has the ability to engage slow-moving targets. The bomb combines the benefits of this electro-optical guidance with those of satellite guidance in one platform.
It is also equipped with GPS, an INS, or inertial navigation system, which basically those are used to determine the location of the munition in relation to its target.
These munitions can operate in adverse weather and visibility conditions like fog and darkness, and in GPS-denied zones. Ultimately, these kits can convert 1,000-pound or 2,000-pound class general-purpose warheads into precision, standoff strike weapons with ranges of 120 kilometers and 60 kilometers respectively. And they can be deployed from farther away than unguided weapons.
They can stand off as much as 100 kilometers, so it's safer for the pilots and the aircraft.
Dumb bombs account for almost half of Israel's air-to-ground munitions in Gaza. But the IDF has been employing dive bombing tactics, dropping these munitions closer to the ground for increased precision. The kits attach to the front and back sides of a number of different unguided bombs that Israel already has, like the Mk-84. And while the exact price of SPICE kits is unknown, some experts say SPICE-guided munitions are cost-effective because they could allow Israel to use fewer bombs more effectively.
If you hit what you intend with one bomb, you're not dropping a dozen of them trying to do the same thing. So there's going to be less munitions expended or employed, and they're going to be more accurate.
But in such a densely populated environment like Gaza, some experts still have concerns about the potential outcomes of their use.
Anytime you're doing military operations in a densely populated urban area, it's very, very difficult to avoid not having collateral damage and not having great impacts on the civilian population.
Regardless of guidance, if you drop a 2,000-pound bomb on an area packed with civilians, on an area packed with critical infrastructure, you're going to have a blast somewhere of 10 football fields. You're going to have fragments and just pieces of debris going out hundreds, if not over 1,000 feet.
While the IDF did not respond to our request for comment, Israeli officials have said in the past that their intention is not to harm civilians.
Our war is against Hamas, not against the people of Gaza. We use many measures to try and minimize the civilian harm and suffering. We choose the right munition for each target so it doesn't cause unnecessary damage.
A senior researcher at INSS, an Israeli think tank that focuses on national security, says the size and use of the munitions are carefully calculated by experts.
On the whole, it's probably better that they have more precision munitions than less.
But precision-guided munitions aren't enough to ensure an accurate strike. Things like intelligence gathering, targeting policy, and operator proficiency are all essential to making sure the right target is hit. The U.S. is currently investigating several Israeli airstrikes in Gaza to assess civilian casualties and potential misuse of weaponry. Thanks for watching, and if you like this kind of content, click here for a deep dive on the mysterious knife bomb that the U.S. uses in high-profile targeted killings.